journey for us today. How many of you have heard of Andrew Jackson Davis? Yay! I hope I tell you some things you don't know, right? I was astounded by reading his book, his autobiography. I tried to read The Great Harmonialism to no effect. It is too flowery and all over the place to me. But he has some wonderful things to say. Andrew Jackson Davis was born in August 11th, 1826 in New York, near Poughkeepsie, if not in Poughkeepsie. And he wasn't really very specific. You know how we like to be specific. But he was like, yeah, around there. He was born into poverty. His father was a drunk. He was a shoemaker and a tenant farmer. And he was drunk until he had a really bad experience in a bar. And then he was like, okay, we're done with this. So that was good, right? His mother was a homemaker and a natural clairvoyant. And he obviously got his talents from her. He observed her, but never was trained by her. They lived as tenant farmers, moving from house to house to follow the work. Jackson, they called him Jackson, by the way, so now I call him Jackson. Jackson had about 5 months of education, barely learning how to read and write. He wrote phonetically in the beginning. Later, he wrote many volumes, and he had assistance from his wives. Did you know he was married? Twice, yes. He described himself when he was young as a mama's boy, timid, sensitive, a loner, meditative, and a solitary rambler. That's who he was as a young man. He had an older sister who seemed to be a bully at times. He didn't mention her a lot, but a little bit. When he was 10, being the boy that he was, he jumped on a horse and buggy because he was going to ride, and he fell off and got crushed by the wheel underneath his abdomen, apparently. And it caused him to be ill for weeks. There was no medical care because the family was impoverished. It strongly affected his digestion, making it hard for him to eat. His conclusion of this incident, I believe this was in hindsight, was that it was a good thing for a spiritual aspirant who should not be eating a lot. So in my business, in the clinical social work business, we call this reframing. He just did it as a matter of course, as a spiritual aspirant. He just knew how to do it automatically. And so Andrew Jackson Davis is considered one of the founders of spiritualism. He actually was working before the Fox sisters and the wrappings of the Fox sisters. Mesmerism was sweeping New York in 1840s, and he became involved in it at the age of 14 or 15. I couldn't quite discern exactly what year. He was a mesmer, they called it a mesmeric subject, of Mr. Livingston, and then of Dr. Leon, whom he called operators. As we know, mesmerism became hypnosis. So it was similar to that. They called it the magnetic operation. So imagine yourself, 14 or 15. Somebody hypnotizes you, you're out, you're gone, but you're talking. People can hear you. And he basically said, I went to sleep, and I woke up famous. Yeah. So in January of 1844, he reached what he called the third magnetic condition. By this time, he had been giving nightly and free demonstrations indiscriminately. There was no fear of defeat or hope of reward. Nothing was done in secret. And when he reached that level, and he would have been almost 18 by then, I think, he said that internally he perceived a clearer, brighter, truer, and higher world when he was in the spiritual state. However, when he came back to the normal consciousness, he said he remained dull-headed, mystified, and apprehensive. Now, I love that about him, because he's very honest, right? And there is a difference, right? Are we in the uplifted state of spirit, or are we down here mucking around, right? Yeah. He was subjected to the same trials and examinations as the Fox sisters, but before. At first, he had no recall of what he brought forward in his sessions. He continued to be mesmerized by the operators for 4 years. At age 19, he felt his own will and individuality were distinct and self-controlled. He learned to go into what he called a clairvoyant state by himself, and he remembered all that he had seen and heard during the times he seemed to be asleep. But at first, he didn't. It took some time. So I want you to imagine being 15, 16, 17, going into a clairvoyant state, and this is what you see. You can close your eyes if you want. The brain was likewise very luminous with prismatic colors. Every organ of the cerebellum and cerebrum emitted a light peculiar to itself. I could easily discern the form and size of the organ by the shape and intensity of its emanations. This view, I well remembered, excited in me much admiration. But I was so deeply in the magnetic condition and so impoverished in language that I neither manifested any delight nor described a particle of anything I then beheld. In the higher portions of the larger or superior brain, I saw flames which looked like the breath of diamonds. At first I did not understand the cause of these beautiful breathings, but soon I discovered them to be the thoughts of the individuals concerning the strange phenomena then manifested in my own condition. In truth, the brain seemed like a crown of spiritual brightness, decorated with shining crescents and flaming jewels. Each brain seemed different in degrees, modifications, and combinations of the flames and colors, but very, very beautiful. From the brain I saw the diversified currents of life or magnetic fire as they flowed through the system. The bones appeared very dark or brown. The muscles emitted in general a red light. The nerves gave out a soft golden flame. The venous blood a dark purple light. The arterial blood a bright, vivid sheet of fire, which constantly reminded me of the electric phenomena of the clouds. I saw every ligament and tendon and cartilaginous, membranous structure, each illumined with different sheets and magnetic centers of living light. Wow, right? This guy was amazing. He was Edgar Casey before Edgar Casey. And in fact, his readings are at the Edgar Casey Institute in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So, obviously I'm very enamored of all of this. It's just so amazing to read this. If you ever have a chance to read this, I don't know if our bookstore have this. It is a fantastic book. It's just stunning, stunning. So, as a mental health therapist, one of the things that attracted me to him was the magic staff. But let me read you one other thing. One of the reasons I asked Alan to play that song about the earth is because not only did he see into people, he saw into the earth when he was in a clairvoyant state. Earth gave off one particular color, stones another, and minerals still another. When I first discerned a bed of minerals, it was a vein of iron ore. I remember how I started and shivered with a sensation of fright. It seemed that the earth was on fire. The instantaneous elimination of electricity from the entire mass gave the appearance of a deep-seated furnace under the earth. I perceived these rivers of mineral fire ran under the ocean for hundreds of miles and yet were not diminished in a single flame, could not be extinguished. Innumerable beds of zinc, copper, silver, limestone, and gold next arrested my attention, and each, like the different organs in the human body, gave off diverse kinds of luminous atmospheres. The various salts in the sea sparkled like living gems. Sea plants extended their broad arms filled with hydrogenous life and embraced the joy of existence. Cool, right? I like it. I've never seen that, but I'd be open to it. Okay, so, where am I now? So, can you help me, Terry? I've seen this in the corner. Can you hold this pole? Because it will come over when I bring it out, if you don't. So, we have this beautiful flag, and it sits in the corner, but it's the magic staff, right? It's on the paper in front of you, the little part of it. And I think that this is key to spiritualism. I think it's also really hard to manifest. Thank you. So you have that paper in front of you, and I'm going to tell you how he received it, how he lost it, how he kept it anyway, and how he knew his guides. So he got into a clairvoyant state, somewhere around Poughkeepsie, and started walking. And he was elevated, so he wasn't really paying that much attention to his surroundings. He took a boat, and then he started running, and he ran many miles, and he ended up in a graveyard. I found myself seated on a marble gravestone about 18 inches from the ground. The melancholy sanctuary in which I found myself was enclosed by a huge stone wall, surmounted by a top railing similar to a farmer's ordinary fences. The enclosure was in the form of a triangle and occupied about 1.5 acres of smooth land. I counted 11 whole gravestones standing, 5 broken and several scattered upon the ground. A dense wood concealed the surrounding country from my view, and I was thus sequestered in a solitary place for a purpose of which I had not the least knowledge. Nevertheless, without fear, I resolved to continue in the same position as when I awoke to consciousness, and await any suggestions that might flow from within or without. And then a spirit did come to him, and apparently he saw them as much as I see you, he could see the spirit. And the spirit said, I lived on the earth in the form among the inhabitants thereof for a length of time determined by my obedience to natural law. Isn't that an interesting way to describe your time on earth? Yeah. In my analytical investigations, I discovered a threefold or triune power in every compound, 3 essential parts to every established organization, which is absolutely necessary to all things in order that they may be perfectly organized. I founded a system upon these principles and considerations which may be called a medical system of the Trinity. In this system, I maintained the proposition that every particle in the human body possesses a close affinity to particular particles below in the subordinate kingdoms, and that these latter particles, if properly associated and applied, would cure any affected part or organ of the human frame. Okay? So, he pulls out a cane, and an elegant cane. Here is a full synopsis of my system in practice, and I desire that this you should comprehend, and in understanding its fundamental principles, you will gently and justly apply its teachings to the good of your brethren, mankind. Thus saying, he touched a singular spring at the top, and the cane mechanically parted into 3 longitudinal strips. The parts were neatly adjusted to each other and when arranged on the rod, the rod was highly polished silver, by the way, I skipped a part, formed a staff far exceeding in beauty any I had ever beheld. I saw that the pieces remained whole when disengaged from the rod. These he took in his hand and unfolded them piece by piece until they completely separated. Here, on these little blocks, is the name of every disease with which the human race is afflicted. And then they proceed to go through this. Andrew Jackson Davis looks at every single block. I don't know how long that must have taken. Quite a while. Take this, he said, handing the cane to me, and preserve the charge devotionally. That's interesting. For it is the work of a lifetime, demanding equal attention, reflection, and application. Wow. Devotionally. How do you preserve something devotionally? I have questions. All right. So he continues on, and I won't continue on with that. But anyway. Then another person came into their presence. And he had more to say about the cane and about what he would be doing with it in the future. And then it seemed like they were finished. And Andrew Jackson Davis says, I felt directly impelled by some influence to arise and with my staff depart. This impulse I immediately obeyed. On endeavoring to surmount the railing, however, my clothing became entangled and I experienced a sense of irritation, intense anger because of the obstruction. This was unusual, for I had not had such feelings for many years. Indeed, I can hardly remember ever being so angry except when my father forgot something. This is another story I won't go into. I was thus exasperated at the rail, which, being split at the end, had caught my coat. Meanwhile, the strangers were observing my feelings and movements with apparent complacency. On seeing this, I requested the one who had given me the cane to hold it, till I gained the opposite side of the fence. And so that happened. But they didn't give it back. Keep well the instruction given thee. Moreover, they speak in their language, right? Sorry, I'm speaking in their 1840s language. Moreover, learn to be wise and gentle, and add to gentleness love, and to love wisdom. And wisdom being pure begets illumination, and illumination happiness. And as it was given to me to say, in a due season thou shalt return, and then this staff shall be thine. But thou must first learn not to be under any circumstances depressed, nor by any influences elated. For these are the extremes of an unguarded impulse in minds not strong with pure wisdom. From this learn meekness and humility. He said humiliation. I think he means humility. Yeah, that's how he lost it. And then he went back the way he came. Took a while. He had been gone the entire night. And then during afternoon of the next day, he was able to recall the general impressions. The smaller of the two men, the first one, was called Galen, a physician of considerable renown. And the second one was once known as Swedenborg, a Swedish philosopher and theologian. But up to that time, I had never heard anything of the names or works of these persons, by means of either books or reports, and so I began already to entertain troublesome misgivings as to the reality of my experience. I don't know about you, but that happens to me after Spirit connects with me. And I'm like, was that real? I don't know. I'm not sure, you know. But it almost doesn't matter. It's like he wrote it down. It's real enough for me, and I'm amazed by the whole thing. So from that experience, he changed how he operated clairvoyantly. He charged for his work because he knew it was useful. His instructions for healing were at times hard to follow and even unbelievable by those who asked. For example, you have to remember this is the 1840s. There was a deaf man who wanted to hear. He was told to get the warm skins of dead rats to be placed over each ear each night. It worked. He did it, it worked. There was a person who had a skin felon. I guess that's some kind of, you know, a boil, something like that. He was told to get a live frog, peel off the skin, and place it on the diseased area. It worked. It went away. An elderly deaf man who just wanted to be out of pain, I guess it was painful for him not to hear, was told to catch 32 weasels. When was the last time you saw a weasel? I imagine you could find 32 in the 1840s. You know. Take the middle joint of their hind legs and boil out that oil, 1 drop of this in each ear twice a day, till the pain was relieved. He didn't do it, and I don't blame him. How do you catch 32 weasels? I don't even know where they are. Where do weasels live these days? I guess they still live in New York. I don't know. The elder man said, ridiculous and disgusting, and the cure was not attempted. So how did he apply the magic staff, which you have in front of you? Those all come directly from this book and are yours to keep. You may take them home. You may think on it. I have to tell you something interesting. So I've been studying this for about a month, maybe longer, and thinking about it. And as I was reading this, I have never been so angry about everything in my life. Everything was like ticking me off. And I'm like, oh, this is not good, you know, what's going on here? But it's very much like, let's say you're roasting a bird for the holidays, right? And that pan is disgusting, right? And you leave it sit for a while, and you put some water in it, and stuff starts floating to the surface, and you put some detergent in it, and more stuff comes up, and you scrub it, and more stuff comes up, and eventually you have a clean pan. I think it's like that with emotion. You know, I think that if we try and keep it down, it's going to come up somehow. It's going to come out the side, you know, it's going to be in the pan the next time you cook it, whatever. And that's all I could figure, because I'm not an angry person. If someone said, are you an angry person? I'd be like, no. I'm just studying this. You know, it's like, keep an even mind in all situations? Oh no. No, that's too hard. But what Andrew Jackson Davis did is he literally used it all the time. Any conflictual situation with any person, he would remember it. He would literally take it, talk with it, and use it, right? And I think that if there's an emotion hiding that you're not looking at, it's going to come up. And that's okay. That's okay. It's not going to stay. It's going to come up and go. So, in the summer of 1844, again, we're in the 1840s, he became very depressed and he prayed for guidance. And after about a half hour, there was a flash of golden light. In his room, he saw the magic staff hanging in the air on a transparent white sheet. And that is exactly what you have in your hands. I have more here. There's more on this side because I thought there would be more people sitting on this side. But if you want one, just let me know. I have a bunch. I think the magic staff is very key to spiritualism. I think it's not in our principles. I think it should be. I don't know how it'll get in there though. But anyway, I think it's worthy to keep it devotionally, to talk about it, to think about it, to realize that emotions don't stay. Emotions are expressed, they leave. Expressed, they leave. Expressed, they leave. And I think that's the way it should be. You know, and just because somebody gets mad at you, you don't have to get mad back at them. Just because your cart has a wonky, you know, little thing, you can go get another cart. You know? And under all conditions, under all circumstances, all circumstances, family members who annoy you, can you keep an even mind? Sometimes. And it can be difficult, right? 3-year-olds, challenging. So my little granddaughter does not like her car seat. And so when we get after an activity, we try and get in the car and she won't get in her car seat. And she sits here and she sits there and she wants to sit on my lap and play with it, you know, and I'm like, I'm just going to wait. You know, so sometimes we wait 5 minutes, sometimes we wait 15 minutes, sometimes we wait a half. The most longest one has been a half hour. But eventually she gets in the car seat because I do not turn on the car until she gets in her car seat and gets buckled in. And I actually congratulate myself for that, because if it had been my kids, I would have wrangled them into that car seat, you know. You're getting in the seat! And with her, I'm like, whatever, I got time. I'm half retired. So, it's good. I'm learning. So, I told you he was married. He was married twice. I believe these were platonic marriages. He leads us to believe that they were. So when he was 18 or 19, he had been communicating with someone named Mrs. Dodge, who was much older than he and divorced. And he was her spiritual mentor. And back in the day, of course, there was no Facebook or phones, so it was all via letter. And she called him brother, and he called her spiritual sister. He received a spirit message clairvoyantly to investigate her life. So he was able to look onto another person's life and see everything about it. From that, he decided that they were to marry, and so they did. When they married, she, because she was divorced, had an annual stipend on which they survived, along with some of the money, very little money, I don't know how much he made, he never said, from his readings and books. He was writing books at that point, and healings, doing healings. And I'm not sure when she died, but she didn't live that long. Maybe 8 or 9 years they were married, and then she passed away. And then he was in communication with his guides, Galen and Swedenborg again, during a session of clairvoyance. And they pointed him to a woman named Mary, also an older woman who was very well educated, who had 2 children, but she had become divorced. And the children stayed with the father, and she was permitted visitation. Very different things back then. Spirit gave him the vision and direction to her as his next wife. She was a part of the temperance movement, and she was a good speaker and a good writer, and he needed that in his life, so they became each other's helpmates. Jackson lived to be 83 years old. He died on January 13th, 1910. And Jackson exemplified many of the skills that we associate with spiritualism. He was clairvoyant, clairaudient, precognitive, he could do precognition, psychometry, astral travel, intuition, and psychic. And he had it all. I'm sure he was clairsentient, although he didn't describe that much. And he was a fascinating, fascinating person. And I see why he is one of our founders. And I hope that you will avail yourself of his books. And if you decide to read the Harmonialism, be prepared. It is very flowery. It is hard to discern sometimes exactly what he wants to say. But his autobiography, called accessible, and I highly recommend it.